Welcome everyone to another talk on invisible architecture. And today we have a really knowledgeable guest about sacred acoustics, which by the way is the name of her website. And to tell you a little bit about Karen Newell, she is an author and specialist in personal development with a diverse body of work that rests upon the foundation of heart-centered consciousness. As an innovator in the emerging field of brainwave entrainment, audio meditation, Karen empowers others in their journey of self-discovery using sacred acoustic recordings and other techniques. She teaches how to enter and engage with your inner world to connect to guidance, achieve inspiration, improve wellness, and develop intuition. And she's co-author with Evan Alexander, MD, of Living in a Mindful Universe. And he's also your partner, right? In your
That's
website?
Correct. Yes.
So welcome, Karen.
Thank you.
That sounds like everything in the world.
Yes, thank you, Carol. Good to be here.
So I'm so interested in all that hemisync research that you guys have just taken to another level, because back in the day I had all of those with two of my friends. We put our money together. We bought the Monroe Voyager series. I don't know, it was
Right,
like $100 or something. And then it all just corroded.
Yeah, no, I bought all those CDs too long ago.
Yeah, he was so into his, I mean, it was like really happening. And since then, it's just gone to a whole nother level. I mean, the research and stuff. So maybe you want to tell how you got into it and kind of how you got into it.
Yes, well, you bring up hemisync, and that was one of the early producers of binaural beats that really got me moving in a new direction. I will say that I was very interested in exploring things like meditation and energy healing. And I also took courses in feng shui and all kinds of different metaphysical things. Mm-hmm. And yet every single one of these courses would involve some type of meditation. Mm-hmm. And I became aware that I was really not very good at meditation. I was very good at being a project manager. And so whenever my mind would go quiet, that's what would go through my mind, are all of these lists of things I needed to do and conversations I needed to have. And so I was told to just keep practicing, focusing on the breath, and it just wasn't working for me. And so I looked for other types of support, and I came across different types of sounds. First, it was like crystal bowls or tuning forks or brass bowls, anything that made that, or gongs, anything that made that sort of monotonous, regular sound was very intriguing on how it sort of shifted my awareness. And that's when I discovered these binaural beats. And that's what are embedded into hemisync recordings. Hemisync is actually a brand name for binaural beats that Bob Monroe created first back in the 70s.
I see. I didn't realize. I thought it was just a generic term. Okay.
It's like that word Band-Aid. That's a that's a brand name for elastic bandage.
Is it really?
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
A brand name. So same with Q-tip for cotton swabs, right?
Yeah, no, it reminds me, I think Paul McCartney took a happy birthday song and registered it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So at any rate, I discovered hemisync just like you did. And I discovered that these binaural beats really help to quiet the mind, so much so that at first I would just fall asleep. And of course, that's a lot of people's goals who have insomnia. But I wanted to maintain that border between awake and asleep that was talked about, where the body gets profoundly relaxed, but the mind gets aware, more aware, so that you can get in touch with intuition and inner guidance and all of that. And so over time, I did learn to stay awake listening to these binaural beats. And I found some very interesting experiences as a result. And in the process of all of that exploration, I met someone named Kevin Causey. And he is an electrical mechanical engineer, lives in New York City, born and bred Manhattanite. And he told me he wanted to make his own binaural beats. And he was teaching himself to be an audio engineer. And so he learned that I had this vast library of all kinds of different music that I had been using to explore within consciousness. And so we sort of teamed up and we started analyzing and taking apart all the recordings that others had made in order to learn how could we make them ourselves. And so he and I did this for about a year. He would create up in New York these recordings, and then we would both listen to them at the same time and then get on the phone and tell each other what just happened.
Your experience.
It was great fun, yes. And so we were able to even sometimes have these kind of joint experiences where we would sort of meet up with our consciousness. He was actually very skilled at out-of-body experiences, and I wasn't so much, but we were able to connect somehow with our consciousnesses. I did learn how to have OBEs, out-of-body experiences, at some point, but that's not what we were up to there. And so it was about a year into this sort of hobby, this personal hobby, that we were regularly listening to these recordings he would create, when we met Eben Alexander. And Eben, you mentioned, is the co-author of his third book, Living in a Mindful Universe. But his first book, Proof of Heaven, hadn't even come out yet. He didn't even have an agent when we met, but it was all about the near-death experience he had as a neurosurgeon. And
that's such a famous one.
Yeah, that's just a whole other story there, if you haven't already heard about it.
Maybe give just a little background on that.
Well, he had a coma in 2008. He went into an unexpected coma due to meningoencephalitis. And he was in a coma for 7 days. And everyone thought he was going to die. And if he didn't die, he would just be in a vegetative state for the rest of his life due to the damage that was going on to his brain. And yet he had this amazing spiritual journey during the coma. And it was when he woke up and then looked at all of his medical records as a neurosurgeon that he realized he should not have had that experience with his brain having that much documented damage. It could not have been brain-based, which led him to sort of reevaluate his entire worldview as a materialist doctor and realizing, no, we are much more than our physical bodies. And so when we met him, it was 3 years after this coma, and he had discovered that sound could be used as well, in his case, to sort of allow him to return to some of those experiences he had during the coma. And so when we met him, I let him know that we were creating our own technology. And so it just so happened that a few weeks later, he was up in New York City visiting with publishers to see if anyone might publish his story. And that's when Kevin went to visit him in his hotel, hooked him up to this EEG device that hooked up to the frontal lobes of the forehead, and let him listen to some of our sounds. And he was blown away at what they were able to do for him. And so he highly encouraged us to create a company in order to make these recordings available to others. And so he was the real catalyst that probably is a result of us having this conversation today. Because it had occurred to us we might do that one day, but we didn't really have that catalyst. And
well, I love that you came up with Sacred Acoustics. It's such a fabulous name.
Well, Kevin and I, the summer before, we had thought about, well, what if we did create a company? What would we call ourselves? And I was a web developer. And so I knew that you really want your URL, your domain name, to match your company name. They become very hard, that's challenging to find them because only one person can have them. But we had come up with a bunch of different names. So when Eben suggested make a company, I had already registered that URL, Sacred Acoustics, along with a few others, and that's the one that we chose. So I'm glad you like that name.
Yeah. Because there's so many sacred sounds and sacred, but it makes it distinctive. It's nice. Yeah.
Right. And acoustics is more that science, because there is science behind the sounds that we create. The binaural beats are actually having an effect on the brain. I don't know if you want me to go into that.
Oh, I do, because it was so interesting how one comes from the inner ear and one from the stem. The brain.
The way it works is that binaural beats are created when you create one tone in one that goes into the left ear on a stereo system is left and right differentiation. So when the left ear receives one signal and the right ear receives a slightly different signal, it creates this kind of wah, wah, wah sound. And that's what the binaural beats are excuse me, that's what the crystal bowls and brass bowls are doing. They're actually emanate a natural form of binaural beats. So it's no wonder,
right? Okay.
Yeah, it's no wonder that meditative teachers think these might help people because they work the same way as a binaural beat, just in a natural form.
Well, I was going through and thinking about this. It was something, and then I tried looking up online and I could find nothing. But is it like the overtone singing, like the Tibetan monks and Jill Pearce and all of them? Is that similar? Because it seems it
there
creates
is
a third sound.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to use sound for healing and meditative techniques, and this is just one of them. So I don't think Jill Pearce is necessarily in binaural beats, but I do know that people can use their voice. They can use instruments like the didgeridoo to create these binaural beats. They don't even necessarily know that's what they're doing.
Yeah, no, they're just overtoning. She was doing it like the Tibetan monks.
Yeah, well, that would be the harmonics of the carriers. And actually, yeah, so here's how binaural beats work. They actually line up with different brainwave states. So the brainwave states are measured in an electric signal that comes out of the brain. So 0 to 4 hertz in the electric signal is the delta range. And that's the range that we're in when we're asleep. 4 to 7 hertz, that's the theta range. So that's just above being asleep. So you're still very relaxed, a very deep meditative state. Alpha is 8 to 12 hertz. And that's the state we're in when we're very focused on a task, generally speaking. Alpha also shows up in dream sleep. That's what's going on. While you're also in delta, a little alpha might pop up when you're having a dream. And then beta is 12 to 30 hertz. That's the state we're in when we're walking, we're talking. That's the state I'm in when I'm trying to meditate, and my brain, my mind is just having all of those racing thoughts. So the binaural beats are created to help lower your brain waves into those theta, delta, or alpha ranges where you can have a little more ability to manage your thoughts. And so we create different combinations of these frequencies, and it's those carrier frequencies that every single carrier frequency, those are the ones you actually hear. So say the 100 hertz in one ear, the 104 hertz in the other ear, the difference between them matches that 4 hertz brainwave speed, right? So, and I use 4 hertz as an example because that's that border right between awake and asleep. And that's often the sweet spot that people want to get to have these kinds of experiences. We did use these recordings in a pilot study. A psychiatrist in New York City used them in her practice. She actually prescribed them to her patients, but first she had them fill out the state trait anxiety inventory. We decided that that would be a nice thing to measure quantitatively instead of just collecting people's experiences. And so we found that over a 2-week listening period, filling out that form, that people's anxiety levels would reduce by 26% just by adding.
Wow.
So while some people are using them, you know, as we were saying, to develop intuition and so on, they really just help to reduce anxiety, which makes a lot of sense because they're relaxing the mind to help you get into deeper states. And so it was very useful to find such a practical application for them out in the world. And it actually, that study got published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease in February 2020, right before the pandemic. Yes. And so
then, I mean, with this pandemic, I just, like, they always talk about, you know, the monkey chatter, I think it just went over the top.
Well, it did. And we're all home alone, not knowing what to do with ourselves.
All this TV, all this stuff.
Yeah, anxious about our jobs and money and illness and people dying. And so we, at that time, right after the pandemic began, we actually made those recordings. They were already made available, the ones used in the pilot study, but we made them available for anyone in financial uncertainty, absolutely free.
That's so great.
Yeah. And
I've gone on and done that 20-minute one you have.
Yes.
I love that. That's so, and so for anybody listening, it's on her site. I mean,
yes, go to
fabulous.
Yeah, sacredacoustics.com, look for the free download, enter your email, and you'll receive a link to that recording. But if you're interested in those recordings, it's a bundle of recordings used in the pilot study. Look for Whole Mind Bundle. And
Whole mind. Okay.
yeah, you have to whole mind bundle. You'll get recordings in delta, theta, and the alpha range. And the patients in that pilot study who did not listen to the recordings, but still filled out the anxiety inventory, their anxiety decreased by only 7% in the same period, just with regular therapy. So therapy works, but then we combined with the recordings, look how much more effective it was.
Oh my God, that's unbelievable.
It puts the patient in the driver's seat.
Yeah, you know, I'm a dowser, and I remember back in the 80s, they hooked up some, like they took, like I think it was 6 dowsers, 3 female, 3 male, all master dowsers, you know, that like just could find them well all the time. And or some are water, you know, people have different, their bodies resonate to different things, oil, water, whatever, but they would get in that state. And in the mind mirror, every single one got the same signature, which was high delta, high theta, and beta.
There you go. Yeah.
It was really interesting, you know, and you see these little signatures, and it was totally different than a Zen master, or, you know, every one of them had a different, and they thought it was probably because dowsers are searching. Like the other aren't searching. You know?
Yeah, the delta would speak to that. You're just really putting that monkey mind in the, you know, timeout, as we say. And theta, you know, you're reaching that meditative state. The idea that beta was in there tells me what you just said, that they were actively, you know, performing a task, and yet at the same time they were profoundly relaxed. That's what that tells me. That's amazing. I love to douse. I think that's great.
I just thought it was so, like, they would do several, you know, like Zen masters and they all would get that same signature, that same profile.
That is pretty amazing. Yeah.
It just shows the work you're doing, like how it can really be pinpointed, you know?
Oh, it can. And our formulas are so precise. Kevin, our engineer, he creates these complex formulas that go out to 4 decimal points to make all of these. Every single frequency in all of our recordings are harmonic to the others. And that's the overtones that you're speaking of. So our own recording, for example, is made up of 108, 216, and 432. So when you add 108 to 108, that's 216, that's an overtone, and then 432, and so on. The beautiful thing about voices and instruments is there are so many beautiful natural overtones, and we're creating them with digital frequencies. So there's a little bit of loss there, but the fact that we are very focused on the harmonics make them sound a lot more musical than others. You may recall listeing to Hemisync that there was a lot of white noise or pink noise.
It was like really impossible.
Right, like that sound, like, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we've been able to really eliminate the need for that. We use it a little bit, and sometimes water sounds, but because they're harmonic, they sound more like music instead of just obnoxious digital.
So now, aren't those Fibonacci numbers?
I'm sorry?
Are those Fibonacci numbers, aren't they?
No, the 108, 216.
Because they're sacred numbers. I know, like in sacred geometry, 108, 260, or even the occult 432 are, you know.
Those are sacred numbers. I do believe, is 432 a Fibonacci, or you know, I'm getting Fibonacci.
I just know the lower one, so I didn't.
Yeah, well, there's also solfeggio. There's the solfeggio frequency.
Yeah, 528, all of those.
Yes, and those we actually have used. We've used 528 for our heart recordings, because that is supposedly related to the heart. And we've used all of the solfeggio frequencies in our light body recording. So, and in that one, we mix in delta, theta, alpha, and gamma frequencies. The only one that we have gamma. It's interesting that you brought up the dowsers we're getting in the delta range, because people say, why would you feed us delta? And, you know, if we don't want to go to sleep, and sometimes, you know, that monkey mind is pretty powerful. So it really, really does help. And they're getting into it naturally. That's amazing.
And so I remember, and I was trying to get her name back. It was somebody, you know, you just do so many of these classes and conferences. And she had made like the like the overtones, like, but she had it of every room. She had made charts like for homes. Real famous. She had Anyhow, when I find out, I'll email you her address.
Yeah, sounds
I mean,
interesting.
her name, yeah. But she had like, so she could go and it'd be repeatable, that there was a sound for a room.
Well, that makes sense to me because, you know, they've also studied ancient sacred sites. That's really how the word sacred got brought in here. Is I've always had this lifelong fascination with sacred sites like the Great Pyramids and all kinds of things that we don't know how to build today that somehow people long ago were able to build. But they've studied some of these, like at Newgrange,
Right.
Newgrange and the Hypogeum in Malta, and some of these other settings. They've studied the acoustics inside these chambers, and they've actually found it was the pair group, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. They're no longer together in that using that name, but they found that there was a pattern of certain resonance coming out of these, and it was somewhere, the resonance was like you know, somewhere between 100 and 115 hertz, somewhere in there. I forget the exact number, but that's right where that male comes in. Right around 100 hertz is
I remember these, I can't remember his name right now, but he had the Lay Hunter for years. He published it, and he led a group, and they did all of the standing stones, and they found there's a 14-day, it goes up 7 days and then down 7. It's a wave that's repeatable in them. It was very, and they were able to record it on, you know, instrument.
We have only scratched the surface,
exactly,
of our current day researchers on what those amazing structures were really built for. I know in the Great Pyramid you have there, I think there's like an 8 hertz resonance, which is that border between theta and alpha. Again, a very deep sort of altered state of consciousness. And I surmise that that's what these structures were used for, was to help people get in touch with that, what we might call the spiritual part of ourselves, that non-physical part.
Yeah, in the last interview last week, 2 weeks ago, I had Scott Olstead on, who did Secrets in Plain Sight, and went around the world. I mean, what he found, the relationships between all the different sacred sites and their energies and the sacred architect geometry they created, it's amazing.
Yeah, it really, really is. And you know, along with that is that concept of mystery schools, right? Way back then, some of these sacred sites may have been used in the mystery schools. And what fascinated me, what fascinated me about them was that initiation they would have people go through, and somehow they would get them in touch with their consciousness. You know, what we try to do today using all different means, they were very busy doing. I mean, it's the human condition to want to know more about who we truly are. And when you don't have all the distractions of television and social media, you know, like they didn't have any of that back then. I can just imagine how integral this sort of way of life really was. Well,
it just reminds me of the difference between being a pilgrim and a tourist.
Yes.
You know what I mean? They weren't distracted, and they had more an agenda, and it was like, you know, they weren't running around Chartres in their tennis shoes being ungrounded.
Right, trying to get photographs.
All in their tennis shoes, ungrounded, as they're going through all these sacred sites. It was always amazing to me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I remember being at Chartres, and then we had all the tourists, but then some gypsies came, and they did the entire perimeter on their knees.
Wow.
They crawled it. Yeah, I mean, that's when you're talking about that, how serious it is.
Yes. Well, I just think we could use some of that in modern day, not necessarily in the same fashion, but that's really what we're trying to do.
Just more conscious.
Yeah, help people realize we're more than all of this stuff around us that has somehow become so important to us.
Right.
The real meat, you know, lots of people want to know, you know, why am I here? What is my purpose? That's such a common sort of existential question. And you can find out by exploring within, by quieting that monkey mind and seeing what's going on in there. We call it, you know, the inner observer. It's sort of a neutral part of each of us that exists, that sort of can observe what's going on. And you can think of it as your higher self, your expanded self, your pure soul, something
Mhm.
like that. And our modern day is really missing out when we don't have, I would say, a secular understanding of that, something that's outside of the dogma of religion, because
Mhm.
it's really just becoming a fact that our consciousness can exist independently of the brain, regardless of what your religious beliefs are. And so
Exactly.
we really do need to start bringing this into the secular world.
I always liked it, like in my occult studies, and then I found out the Chinese were doing the same, and like all of this, but like it's the cave in the center of the head, and I think that which is created by the pineal and pituitary, the two of them create what's called the cave. Plato's cave, Merlin's cave. The Chinese call it the crystal cave on
Yep.
all of their esoteric anatomy, and when you pull back and you look through that cave, the whole training is to pull back in your head and look through the cave out. You look wide, it's like Goethe, you have a wider vision of
A
life.
broader perspective.
But when I was reading all of your stuff and looking at all the research you're doing, that's where that all is kind of happening.
Exactly. This is not new.
It's not new, but it was, wow, yes,
Yeah. So
that's
the Chinese had their traditions, which,
Mhm.
really the Chinese still understand that there's a metaphysical world, that there's not just a physical world.
Exactly.
The Indian culture,
Mhm.
continent of India, they had the whole Vedic texts and all of that. And I would say that Egypt is really the source of all of this information for the
Mhm.
Western world.
Mhm.
It's just when the Greeks got a hold of all of this information, they decided to rationalize themselves out of the belief in a non-physical world. And so that's where we find ourselves today in the Western world. The traditional Western scientific community won't admit that there's a non-physical world. They want to just act like it doesn't exist. And yet our roots too, not just Indian and Chinese, out of Egypt, we definitely knew what was going on.
A few interviews before, I had something that someone I've listened to for years, Laird Scranton, who's done worldwide studies and really looking at languages and all of that and studying the hieroglyphics. And so it was so amazing. Like there's one, Schwaller de Lubitz, who was the other big hieroglyphic study, found that all of these, Egyptologists and everybody, nobody could understand like some of these, the hieroglyphs. So they found if they stood between two walls, the two walls the hieroglyphs here and here needed to be related by the person between them. It was
Oh
pretty
my
amazing. We're back to the
God.
cave in the middle of the head. And
Yeah, well, just like, we just used to know these things, and how language was
Mhm.
invented through writing. Apparently the Sanskrit language was originally invented to bring the energies to the physical world through words, right? And so it was this beautiful lyrical kind of language. And
Mhm.
of course, it's all been shifted around since way back then, but it used to be that you could chant these different Sanskrit hymns in order to enact certain, I guess magic might be the word, just certain things to happen in the physical world. And people
Mhm.
now think if you just do the chants, it's supposed to work. And when it doesn't work, they throw their hands up. But you have to be holding a certain energy in order for them to
Mhm.
work,
And
right?
the idea on the Sanskrit and cuneiform and hieroglyphs, they're all multi-layered.
Right.
We're so like we have a meaning. You know what I mean? It was so much more nuanced. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as some people say, like Eben, who comes from that materialist scientific world, he thinks this is a great awakening to these facts. And I'm like, no, it's a reawakening.
There you
to these
go. That's a
facts,
good one.
right? It's not
Uh-huh.
a new revolution, it's a re-revolution. So
Mhm.
we're just remembering, but with our we have learned so much about the physical world, no doubt, but
Mhm.
at a cost, right? So
Well,
I think,
I have another one I'm studying with, but they're really onto that, all of this stuff, like in Iraq, when we went into the museums and everywhere, that underline everything. It isn't really oil we're after ancient artifacts and that ancient knowledge that you're talking
Right, like the
about from the
Stargate,
past.
right, like
Yeah.
the Stargate for time travel and all those wonderful things we hear
Mhm.
about and think, oh, they're myths, but are they?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the brave folks that you're talking about, they're not myths at all. It's real, and they're out looking for it. I am fascinated by all of that ancient knowledge that we seem to have lost, but
Mhm.
certainly many souls are bringing it back. Much
Mhm.
appreciated.
Now, when we went back into I was reading somewhere, so I wanted to get that. So you would hear part of the sound comes from the brain stem and part from the inner ear. Is that true?
Well, that's where I'm confused. What I think you're picking up is what we often say. Evan usually explains this as the brain stem.
Okay.
What he says is that the two tones coming in are heard as a third sound by
Right.
the inner ear,
Yeah.
and they're affecting the lower brain,
Oh, I see. Okay.
right? And the lower
Yeah,
brain
that
stem,
makes sense. Okay.
right? So there's levels to the brain. The lower brainstem is the most primitive part of the brain, the part where consciousness at its most primary must have somehow existed in that part of the brain. But when you get to the more modern part of the brain, the outer surface of the brain is the neocortex. That's what creates language. That's what, makes us human. But the lower brainstem is in all brains, reptilian brains and any other brain of a living creature. So it's really that primitive part of us that we believe those tones are affecting.
I remember back Patrick Flanagan and all that made the neurophone. And then this other guy he was working with, I forgot, I did a workshop, and they would put the on the bottom of your feet, the electrodes, and then you'd hear it in your head.
Oh yeah, I love that. There's also those bone conducting headphones where you don't wear them over your ears, you wear them over your head and you hear the music and the vibrations of your bones.
Wow.
Yeah, there's so much amazing technology. Really, this type of technology is just a way for us to interact with that non-physical world, right? It gives us sort of a hook into it, electric currents and things like that. Or, I often talk about the electromagnetic field of the heart, because we can measure that field with a device, the electromagnetic frequencies that come out. And we can find that it moves around the body. It actually expands and contracts around the body based on your emotional state. So your emotion isn't necessarily measurable, but the electromagnetic field that is created because of your emotion is measurable, right? So that having something to measure gives us a window into what might be going on.
Right, and it's a little more objective than dowsing.
Well, yeah.
I always think, I see these mass dowsers that, like, if you can get yourself out of it, are just like beyond. But, to have both, it's good.
It really is. The dowsing I think of as a measurable device, right? That we can use in the physical world to measure unseen energies.
Right.
So it's a similar thing, that the dowsing instrument is the physical measurer in this case, but it's measuring energy.
So this electromagnetic field you're talking about around the heart, is there like a constant kind of, and then it gets out of it, or is it a cycle?
Oh, it is your heart. All of our hearts right now are all emanating this field. So is your brain. Your brain emanates a field. So does the earth. The earth emanates a field, and it's in the shape of a torus every time. That's like a donut with a hole in the middle. So imagine, but it's in a spherical shape. So imagine your heart is the hole, and then out of it all around
the Merkabah. Yeah.
A what?
Like the Merkabah.
Like the Merkabah. Yes. Well, the Merkabah
is a torus.
I would say is shaped differently, but
but it's that. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I know, because it's got the upper and the lower. Yeah.
Well, the Merkabah is a great way to think of it, because the heart is at the center, and it may be that's where the Merkabah came from. But as you go throughout your day and have your emotions, it's always moving, and so it might go out all the way to your, if you have your hands stretched out to either side. It's pretty far. The electric field of the heart is 50 times greater than the brain's, but the magnetic field of the heart is 3,000 times bigger than the brain's.
Whoa.
Yeah, and they've done studies. I'm talking about research by HeartMath, and
Yeah.
HeartMath has done.
I studied with, yeah.
Yeah, so they've done studies that show that someone who's performing a coherence technique, which really is just the act of generating a feeling of gratitude in your heart, finding that center, and someone sitting across from someone else at a table performing a coherence technique, the other person doesn't know what's going on, but it affects their brainwave state and it affects their heart rate variability. So imagine we're all walking around in the world affecting each other's heart rates and brainwave state just by the emotion that we're carrying in our system. So I learned about this. I take it very seriously because I think, oh my gosh, when I'm out in the grocery store, I don't want to start affecting people in negative ways, right? It's like the ultimate golden rule. And so I try to hold, good emotions. Now you have to be careful. Of course, you have to deal with your stuff and not deny your negative emotions and all of that. But if you just can have that awareness of just holding that gratitude, you're actually helping people around you without having to say a word. And I used to do this when I still had a job in the corporate world in business meetings. I would just start breathing in such a way that I would imagine my heart field encompassing people around me and
nice.
meetings. And without saying a word, you can start to calm the energy. I mean, it's not as direct as that, but I encourage people to experiment, especially when you're, say, in an argument with someone. If you have the peace of mind, a state of mind where you can kind of just do that at the same time, it can have some pretty amazing results. So beautiful work, the HeartMath research.
Yeah, I remember there was a technique that, because when I was teaching high school and things, that you would bring down, and it was like like almost a tornado that you would send out around with that energy, and the kids would just calm down. It was amazing.
Yeah. And kids would do well to learn how to do such things, because I think children are going to be much, much more capable than adults. Right. By the time we're adults and we have all of our traumas and our things that get in the way and our denials and our beliefs, and children just have this natural ability. So yeah, I have this vision of, young children being taught how to hold that space in their heart and imagine that it's expanding to the world around them with gratitude. I mean, just that alone, if people knew how to do that, I think it would really make a difference, especially these days with so much contentiousness out in society. We really are all in this together for real. We are all humans by birth. And really our birthright is to understand we are more than just our physical bodies. And hopefully, conflict and things give us opportunities to heal and to grow and to evolve. And so I'm hoping that this global situation that we're in will ultimately help us grow globally.
Well, I think so. Waldorf education, Rudolf Steiner, but the Waldorf, my grandkids are in that, and it's like that really focuses on those kind of things,
Yes.
When you're in a traditional Waldorf school, every grade has the room painted in a different color, and it really gets into it.
It really is I've seen some Waldorf schools. I've toured a couple of them and have friends who have kids in them. They're amazing. Yeah. And I like how they kind of shift depending on the culture that they're in. I visited one in Australia, and most of it was outdoors. They had outdoor kitchens and all kinds of gardens they would grow, and just amazing.
Well, my grandkids are taking every Friday survival class.
Oh, that's wonderful.
They learn how to make fire and purify water and do all of that, And most of Silicon Valley, they all have their kids in Waldorf, so they're all knitting because creating.
Well, at least the ones who have the budget to afford it do. Yeah.
Exactly.
Wouldn't it be nice if some of these kinds of techniques could be brought into inner city schools and others without as much money to create such programs?
Well, there's one now for within LAUSD, which is Waldorf teachers. So it's public, you know?
Oh, wonderful. Oh,
Yeah,
so
it's seeping in is what I'm saying.
Good to know. Yeah, good to know.
Yeah. And so then why don't you talk about your website and something and how they can access and get all the information?
Yeah, okay. So if you go to our website, we mentioned that free download. That's a beautiful place to start because you can hear us talk about it all day long, but everyone is unique and will respond a little bit differently. And so we encourage you to go try that download. You'll want to use headphones. That's how you get the best left-right differentiation. If you have a great surround stereo system and you can seat yourself in the middle of, 2 speakers or 6 speakers, then that's great too. But most of us have headphones or earbuds even that we use, to talk on the phone and such. And that's what we recommend. We have a series of training videos. So if you're not really sure, what to expect, then there is a video called What to Expect, and common challenges and advanced techniques and technology issues and such. And those are all free. You can find them on our website. We also have an app. We have it for the Apple platform, so iPhones and iPads, or we have it for Android devices as well. You can find those training videos and the free download within the app, which some people find a lot easier. If you happen to use an Apple device, you might like to know that any recordings purchased on our website or even the free bundle can be available within our app at no extra cost by logging in with the customer account. We did that because Apple makes it a little challenging to download directly to their devices. They want everything to go through iTunes. And we don't offer our recordings on iTunes because iTunes compresses everything by default, turns those big quality MP3 files into little teeny MP3 files so you can have, millions on your device. But it strips out the quality of the frequency.
Well, that's amazing because so many of these sacred sounds, all these different ones, they're all on iTunes. Yeah.
Right. But binaural beats on iTunes, you probably won't find too many binaural beats on iTunes.
Okay.
And that's where the 2 different channels, just when you lower the compression, you just lose the quality. So for Apple users, we created the app so that they could maintain that quality, easily access the recordings. And we integrated it with our site so that you could buy them directly from us instead of with the iTunes surcharge. So
I wanted to ask you, I had these other things I just like, what is your take on digital versus analog?
Well, there's a lot of
there's reality.
There's a lot of audiophiles out there who absolutely analog is the way to go. When you're creating binaural beats on a computer, you don't really have that option. And so we do create digital frequencies. And so we're not analog, but we do take very good care on the quality of those tones. There's a lot of different ways to create just one tone. And we have a pretty sophisticated device that does it for us. And many people ask about, because this is related, the difference between CD quality and MP3 quality. And so that may be where some people think of as analog digital, although CDs are all digital. The CD quality is definitely better than MP3 because they're made out of WAV files. But we did a lot of trial and error with our MP3 files, and we found that they are identically effective.
That's
when
amazing.
Yes, when they're saved at the highest quality, the 320 kilobytes per second is what all of ours are stored at. So if they go any lower than that, you'll start to lose quality. Now, some audiophiles and very sensitive listeners still find that the CD quality they feel is superior. But we at our events and our personal use is always with MP3 files. And so I encourage people to realize they are just as good at the highest quality.
So I just wanted to ask from an expert because it's such a discussion among people.
It gets very confusing. And even if you are using iTunes and you have Apple lossless or AIFF or, all the different formats, it gets very confusing. But anyone who's confused can just reach out through the Sacred Acoustics contact form, and I will see those messages, or someone else will, and we can help you out.
Yeah. Well, so this was so good. We got lots of information here. So I want to thank you so much for this. And everybody will see you at the next week. So
all right.
Thank
Wonderful.
you again, Karen. That was
well, thank you, Carol. And I appreciate all you do to help bring this information out to other people. Very much appreciated.
So what I'm trying to do, my goal is, I mean, there's so much stuff that's being lost. Like next week, I'm doing one on Ruth Drown, and most people don't even know who she is, and none of her technology can even be replicated in this day. So I'm trying to keep doing them, you know, and like you guys are like at the top of this, and like
wonderful.
And they all relate to invisible architecture.
Yeah, and all of us need to explore more than just one technique.
Exactly.
Yeah, one technique is not going to be the cure-all, and it's I think for each of us a different combination of techniques. So it's wonderful that you spread out so far.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Let me get this.